The 2024 Met Gala theme has just been announced in addition to the dress code for all of the guests, and there's so much to unpack and talk about. In addition to the fact that I decided I'm also going to make a gown for the Met Gala this year. So there's that. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another exciting video. A video that is a little different than usual because usually I'm sharing videos about sewing and sewing tips and education, but today we're actually going to sit down and we are going to chat about a super big fashion event that happens every year on the first Monday in May, and honestly is really exciting for anyone who generally loves fashion. Also, if you love celebrities. I'm not a huge celebrity fan, but I am such a big fan of fashion and the evolution of fashion through time and different people's interpretations of it, especially for events that kind of really give you creative freedom, and that is what the Met Gala is all about. I think the Met Gala holds an even more special place in my heart because it was such a huge focus in the classroom when I was a teacher. Leading up to the Met Gala, we would always talk about the Met Gala theme, what we might think people are going to wear, kind of what our interpretation of the theme is. Sometimes I would have my students design and sketch their own looks for the Met Gala based on the theme. And then whenever the Met Gala actually happened, we would always break it down and dissect what everyone was wearing in class the next day. And it was always so fun to hear my students takes on the different outfits and looks that celebrities and guests were wearing, if we thought that they fit the theme and they did a good job, or if they totally fell flat. So it was always so fun to kind of dive into that, and we would always sometimes as well watch a documentary called The First Monday in May, which takes you back to how the Met Gala actually started and its whole kind of focus and reason for even existing in the first place. If you're not familiar with what the Met Gala is, it is a huge fashion event that happens the first Monday in May every year. The interesting thing about the Met Gala is while a lot of people view it as this event where celebrities show up on an exquisite red carpet wearing some of the most out there and unique and expensive and fancy gowns, even more so than any other red carpet, because the Met Gala really is fashion focused. Aside from just the celebrity spotlight and the fashion, the unique thing about the Met Gala is that it actually closely ties to a fashion exhibit that is always about to open at the Met. That's actually the whole reason that the Met Gala started in the first place, is to become essentially a fundraiser for the Met Costume Institute's collection and continuation of preserving historical fashions and raising awareness and highlighting and showcasing upcoming designers and designers throughout time and history. So Anna Wintour was actually the one who created originally this idea of the Met Gala to accompany and go along with a fashion exhibit that would be soon opening at the Met. Now, the curator for the Met costume exhibit and a lot of these noteworthy fashion collections is Andrew Bolton, who's been doing this for a very long time. And so Anna Wintour, along with Andrew Bolton, always come together, create and kind of research and come up with this exhibit. Andrew Bolton does, and then Anna Wintour then takes that and creates the Met Gala for that year. So they're always tied together in some way. And so while it is a very important night for fashion and celebrities and just red carpet styles, it also sometimes kind of gets undertoned and forgotten that this also is an important event to continue the preservation of fashion history and also just celebrate and appreciate fashion as an art form and self-expression and an important part of history because it always goes along with this costume exhibit. The Met Gala has become an even bigger event the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, especially because of social media. You get onto social media the night of the Met Gala and you're already seeing looks from the red carpet. The next day, it's plastered over social media. You have people creating videos, critiquing and talking about what people are wearing. You have people sharing videos. You have articles over it. The whole gamut. So it is a huge event in fashion for so many reasons, and this year the theme has been announced. The unique thing every year, again, about the Met Gala is that the theme for the Met Gala is tied to the theme and the focus of a fashion exhibit. Now, this year's 2024 Met costume exhibit's fashion exhibit is titled Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion. And it's said that it will feature approximately 250 items that draw from the Costume Institute's permanent collection, many of which have been rarely seen in public before. So while the Met Gala is going to be celebrating the Costume Institute's exhibit, Sleeping Beauty Reawakening Fashion, there's an official dress code for the actual gala, and the dress code for the gala is the Garden of Time. So there's a lot to unpack there, and thankfully we are given light on kind of the inspiration behind the costume exhibit's kind of theme and the pieces that you are going to see there, but we're also given some light into the actual kind of theme and dress code for the Met Gala, which is really interesting. Now, the exhibit itself is going to feature, again, approximately 250 items from the costume exhibit, from the Costume Institute's permanent collection, spanning over 400 years of fashion history. The pieces will include designs by Schiaparelli, Dior, Givenchy, and more. Some garments that are too fragile to even be worn again, such as Charles Frederick Worth's famous ball gown from 1877, will also be displayed via video animation, light projection, AI, CGI, and other forms of sensory stimulation. So something that I find really interesting about this year's costume exhibit is that I am a huge fashion history nerd. I just think it is so fascinating how fashion has evolved and changed throughout time, but also even within the change, there has also been like not a lot of change. Because if you look at fashion about every 20 years, you tend to see very similar things come back. And so that is what I think is so interesting about these fashion exhibits that span such a huge timeline of history, is because you are actually going to see, yes, how fashion has changed, but also how similar themes continue to stay consistent through fashion. This specific exhibit this year is going to feature a lot of delicate and fragile pieces, because obviously it is showcasing pieces from like 400 years of fashion, and so you think back 400 years, those pieces are probably very, very fragile. They're also made out of natural fibers, which break down over time. And so what's also interesting, I think, about this exhibit is that they are incorporating a lot of elements of technology as well for these pieces that aren't actually able to be put on display because they could literally deteriorate and just fall apart. So they're going to be displayed in different forms. But in this exhibit, we are going to be seeing a lot of pieces that changed fashion forever. It mentions the Charles Frederick Worth ball gown from 1877. If you didn't know this, Charles Frederick Worth is noted as the father of haute couture, and haute couture is such a huge, prominent, important part about fashion. And Charles Frederick Worth was essentially the designer and the couture house that set forth the standard of high-end fashion and design. So it's going to be really interesting to see the pieces that are in this exhibit. Now, in regards to the Sleeping Beauty Reawakening Fashion, the kind of focus for the actual exhibit itself, Andrew Bolton and Wendy Yu, curators in charge of the Costume Institute, added that the exhibition will be shaped around 3 main zones: land, sea, and sky, that pay tribute to the natural world. It's very much an ode to nature and the emotional poetics of fashion. So something interesting here is that even though the theme of the exhibit is Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion, it has nothing to do with like Disney princesses and fairy tales. It has to do with these delicate sleeping beauties that are far too fragile to even ever be born again, but we are going to get to analyze them and see them either in person or in a different kind of technological illustration in this exhibit. But outside of that, focusing on these 3 different zones, land, sea, and sky, I just think is really interesting. Some of the things that I have read say that it kind of is focusing a little bit more on sustainability or integrating and using natural elements and things from nature for some of these looks. I believe actually, so I watched the trailer for the exhibit that they posted on social media, and if I can find it, I'll like overlay it here. And so they were showing some different pieces in regards to kind of this delicate fashion, sleeping beauties, and one of the dresses that, and they're like fashion closet collection being preserved, was a dress completely made out of butterflies. And it's actually the dress that is worn by every trinket in the Hunger Games. And so that is obviously a very delicate dress if it's like just made out of tons of, I don't know if it's like real preserved monarch butterflies or if it's fake butterflies, but that is a dress that they showcased in the trailer for this exhibit, which I thought was really interesting. And then you additionally also have all of the very, very old, hundreds of year old historical dresses. So that is what we know thus far about the actual theme for the costume exhibit at the Met. Again, the theme for the costume exhibit influences and inspires what the theme and dress code is for the Met Gala, which we're going to dive into in a minute. But I did want to talk a little bit more about the Met costume exhibit itself, the history behind that, because it's really, really fascinating. Again, like I said, I am such a huge fan of the Met Gala and just all the different designs and styles that you see people wearing on the red carpet to the Met Gala, but also all of the different pieces that are showcased in the actual exhibit itself. And I'm still like, one of my greatest regrets in life is never being in New York at the time that the Met Gala like costume exhibit is actually at the Met. I've gone to the Met 2 times over my like 3 trips to New York, and I adore the Met, but they've never had any fashion exhibits open while I was there. And I always like missed the timing of having a costume exhibit that aligned with the Met Gala. And one day I will make it to New York and get to see one of those exhibits in person. But if you're not able to visit the Met in person and experience the exhibit itself, because it's not just clothing on mannequins, it really is always a very immersive experience, which I think is just so great, because it's not just, oh, here's a dress on a mannequin. It is really immersing yourself in the story and the history behind the pieces. But aside from that, like I said, if you're not able to experience the exhibit in person, the great thing about the Met as kind of a art museum / research institute is that they always produce a amazing, beautiful book every year that is an exhibit guide. And essentially it's every piece in the exhibit that is photographed and then has details about it. And so I have about 3 or 4 of those exhibit guides from past Met costume exhibits. I had the one from camp, which was a fabulous Met Gala. I have the one from 2 years ago, which was called In America, a Lexicon of Fashion, focusing all about American fashion, American designers, which was really, really interesting. I have one from 3 years ago called About Time, which was also fascinating, and I actually want to take a look at that because I think it ties into the dress code and the theme a little bit for this year's Met Gala. And so yeah, I will give you a little peek into some of those because I think those are going to be great places for me to research my kind of inspiration behind creating my own Met Gala dress this year, which I hinted at the beginning of this video. And that is also part of today's video, is kind of sharing my inspiration behind making my own dress for the Met Gala as a really fun creative fashion project. Okay, so like I said, the Met puts out exhibit guides for their costume exhibits every year that have to do with the Met Gala, and I have gotten a couple of those over the years. I just love creating and curating like a fashion library. It's just so fun to have all of those books, especially as someone who loves fashion and just history and all of these things. So anyways, this is the exhibit guide for camp. This is probably my favorite one because it's so beautiful. And so this one's really interesting because they have basically a book in here all about what camp is fashion wise, and then Notes on Fashion was the name of the exhibit for the camp Met Gala. And so you have all the different designs and pieces in here. So we'll take a peek into that one a little bit more. I also have In America, a Lexicon of Fashion. This book is beautiful. The cover is like a textile, and this is the one from 2 years ago that really dives into American fashion, and it's just really, really interesting if you like more modern fashion. So we'll take a look at that. One of the most interesting exhibits, I think, was the About Time Fashion and Duration. I believe this was the Met Gala from 3 years ago, in line with the exhibit Fashion and Duration. And this one was really interesting because it was all done in black and white. But what I thought was so fascinating about this and plays into this idea of time is it would take a piece from, let's say, like the 1950s, look at the silhouette, and then compare it to a piece from like the 21st century. So like a couture piece from 2016, and showcase how the same silhouette was prominent years later and drew inspiration in some way from an older historical piece. And that's this idea of time. Like in fashion, time, like while it fades and changes and like runs out, you almost have like this circular time where things continue to come back. And that's part of the fashion cycle, which I think is so fascinating. When you actually look at fashion, you see things come back in new ways and be reimagined, even though it's staying true to like the original historical inspiration. So those are some of my exhibit guides that we might dive into, because what we are going to dive into for the rest of this video is talking about the dress code for the Met Gala and how I'm going to take that and reimagine it and bring it forth in my creative own way to design and create a piece, a dress for the Met Gala for myself, which is going to be really, really cool. So let's talk a little bit more about what the dress code actually is for the Met Gala, because again, you have the theme for the costume exhibit, but then what do people actually wear for the actual Met Gala? How do they know like what to dress in and as? So the dress code this year for the 2024 Met Gala is the Garden of Time, which again is very like nuanced, very broad. There's so many different directions you could go with that. It's actually though inspired by J.G. Ballard's short story of the same title, written in 1962. It can be interpreted in a myriad of ways. So with this, it is noted that we're probably going to see people wearing floral or botanical inspired pieces on the red carpet, but also people could take it more of a historical route. And so again, because both the dress code and the theme for the exhibit are so closely connected, looking into those a little bit more, we can get more kind of ideas for what people are going to wear. Or if you were a designer designing for someone, me designing a dress for myself, how I'm going to take what this theme is and kind of the essence of the evening and the event and the exhibit and translate it into myself for a dress. Now the connection to the dress code, the Garden of Time, is that the story touches on a similar theme to the exhibit. Again, the theme for the dress code is connected to a short story from 1962, the evolution of human history and the endless cycle of creation and destruction. Now, I did mention this before, I think, and I mentioned the documentary First Monday in May. I highly encourage you to go find that documentary because it really takes you through how the Met Gala is planned, who's invited, how designers are designing for different guests, like how everything comes together behind the scenes. It's very, very fascinating. Again, the Met Gala itself is to raise funds for the costume exhibit. This specific article by Harper Bazaar said that the ball tends to raise millions for the Costume Institute at the Met, which holds an annual accompanying exhibition through the sale of tickets, which are bought by designers and brands. So essentially those celebrities are attending the event, and some celebrities essentially themselves could buy tickets. A lot of times, what's really interesting is that it's almost like designers buying tickets and then being like, hey, I like the celebrity, I want to design for you, will you wear my dress and my design to the Met Gala? And you're essentially like my model for my brand. So a lot of fashion houses and designers are going to design and dress a lot of different celebrities, and so there's a spotlight on those designers for this event. The sale of tickets cost around $35,000 each, with tables ranging from $200,000 to $300,000. So it's a big, expensive event. So it's always interesting to see who shows up there and then kind of speculate, okay, well, how did they get a ticket? How did they afford this? But because what we've seen in the past couple of years, there's actually like a lot of just like political figures that are coming to the Met Gala, because fashion tends to be very political these days. And so outside of just celebrities, you have people who like definitely could not probably afford a $35,000 ticket. So you're like, okay, who's funding them and why are they here? What's the message that they're trying to send? So in this article in Harper's Bazaar, it says that the exhibition will also focus on the need for sustainability in fashion, which is a huge like buzzword in the fashion world. I do think sustainability is really important. I also think ethical fashion is very, very important these days. The exhibition will also look at the evolution of human history and the endless cycles of creation and destruction. This is why the dressing theme is the Garden of Time. So I'm going to quickly look up the short story called The Garden of Time and give you the synopsis of it, because I think it really illustrates the dress code for the gala and why it was chosen in connection to the actual exhibit. So this is a little short synopsis of kind of the theme behind the Garden of Time, which again is a short story published in 1962 by J.G. Ballard. It said, "The Garden of Time is an oddity in Ballard's oeuvre. Most of his short stories take cues from Edgar Allan Poe, but The Garden of Time, a direct allegory, is pure Hawthorne territory, a dark fairy tale with fantasy tropes unusual for Ballard." So already really interesting. Count Axel, character in the short story, and his wife, darling wife, live in a perfect Edenic space that they maintain by picking flowers that freeze time. At the peripheral, a mechanized mob approaches. So apparently what is happening in this story is that like he is picking these flowers to keep the mob from like attacking them, but obviously once you pick all the flowers, time stops being frozen. So anyways, you can go read that short story for yourself, but there's a lot of interesting things to unpack here, especially since the dress code is Garden of Time. So again, we could draw upon garden, nature, sustainability, inspiration, floral motifs, utilizing natural fibers, utilizing actual plants and flowers as the actual construction pieces themselves. We could go more for like what you would wear in a garden rather than just garden motifs. So we have the whole garden thing, okay? Garden is part of it, but then you have time. So Garden of Time. Well, if we were to analyze and really break apart time, what can we glean from that? Obviously, the exhibit itself is Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion. How fashion has progressed and changed through time and history, and how even throughout time, clothing gets more delicate and fragile. There are pieces that we have to preserve to keep them in the way that they are. Pieces that maybe not having been preserved are not as good quality anymore. And so that's what the exhibit is focusing on, this kind of historical element to fashion. But then you also just have this idea again of time and really pulling from different kind of time periods and fashion. So you could have people drawing historical inspirations. You could be going all the way back to Elizabethan era. I was reading an article and I was talking about kind of Elizabethan fashion, Elizabethan sleeves, and I'm going to pull out my like fashion history like resource book and kind of show you some of those inspirations. So again, we could also go like fashion history. So there's so much to unpack here in regards to like which direction do you go if you were a designer designing a piece, which is obviously my challenge right now because I have set myself the challenge to make my own Met Gala gown this year. Am I going to the Met Gala? No. Would I ever want to go to the Met Gala? Probably not. I'm an introvert. Big events like that are just not my cup of tea, but it is a fun, creative challenge as a sewist, as a designer. And so taking what we know, taking what I know, what I've researched and shared so far here in this video about the exhibit itself, the dress code, the theme, the inspiration, the short story, the gardens, the time, history, all those things, what inspiration do we draw from? And so I kind of asked all of you on YouTube and my other followers on social media if they would be interested in seeing me actually make a Met Gala look, and the response was a resounding yes. So there's a lot of people interested in it, so it's prompting me to take on this creative challenge, and there's so many directions I should go and could go. I could literally make so many different gowns for this theme, but I obviously have to bring it down to one. So I want to kind of take you through some historical inspiration that I am really leaning towards, and then share some of my actual design ideas and inspirations with you based on this theme. So if you're still here, sticking around, continue to stick it out. We're gonna dive into some interesting fashion history as I share my inspiration for designing my own Met Gala gown for this year's theme. Okay, so like I shared before, this is the exhibit guide for the About Time Fashion and Duration exhibit, which was a Met Gala theme and costume exhibit from, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. So there's obviously a lot of interesting analysis of time and history that they write about at the beginning of this exhibit guide. But what I thought was so fascinating about this exhibit is that they would take pieces that were more historical, like this dress from 1870, for example, and they would compare the silhouette and shape to a more modern gown, such as this one, which was done by Schiaparelli in 1939, an evening dress that has very similar shape and silhouette to this gown from the 1800s. Again, you have kind of the backs and the bustles, which I think is very interesting. This exhibit specifically is giving me a lot of inspiration for this year's theme, which is Garden of Time, and really thinking about, okay, how could I create something that's modern but that draws from historical inspiration and silhouettes. You have this dress from 1885 with the giant bustle in the back, and you have this beautiful dress from 1986. So I just think it's so interesting, and so this is really giving me a challenge to look at modern fashion reinterpreted with historical inspirations. Now, with that being said, let's actually look at some history here. This is one of my favorite historical references. It is the Definitive Visual Guide from the Smithsonian, and it literally just goes through fashion history. So we have ancient world, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, all the things. And so this is what I'm going to see silhouettes that would have been popular in history and reimagine it in modern terms. Now, the first one that I am leaning towards is more of your Renaissance-y. And the reason for it is that when I was reading an article, there was a lot of reference to Elizabethan sleeves. Now, Elizabethan sleeves would be kind of similar to this and this, although this is the 1450s to the 1500s, and the true Elizabethan sleeves would be more of the 15 to 1600s, these kind of bodices, a little bit more puff sleeves. I'll put some of those images on the screen, but a lot of these silhouettes are giving me inspiration for very structured bodices, very prominent, noteworthy visual sleeves with interesting textures. This very elegantness is definitely like my inspiration. So right here, Anne of Denmark, her gorgeous gown, these sleeves, this bodice. So this is my inspiration for a lot of these types of sleeves and sleeve shapes. You also have all of these collars, which I think is really interesting. High collars were really prominent during this period of history and the Renaissance, and so taking this reinterpreted in a modern way, I think would be very on theme for the Met Gala and this idea of time. Now, playing into this idea of gardens, I want to kind of bring in more floral motifs, and so I'm going to share more of that in a little bit. Here we go. We actually have Elizabeth the First. So when we talk about Elizabethan sleeves, this is what we're talking about. These prominent, noteworthy sleeves, all this texture, this bodice. This is the inspiration. And here we have a more modern interpretation of it from a fashion show by Alexander McQueen. So again, designers have been inspired by history throughout time. So this is kind of one direction I want to go. And my inspiration for that is a very specific dress that I will share more about. Now, the other historical idea and inspiration that I kind of got for this theme is the 1920s, which is really weird because I usually am not the biggest fan of the 1920s. But based on some of the haute couture shows from the most recent haute couture fashion week, there were some really interesting shapes and silhouettes, which brought me to kind of this shape and silhouette from the 1920s, the robe de style. So this style was in stark contrast to the streamlined dress of the modern woman, with its straight lines often emphasized by geometric decorations. A much softer or more romantic silhouette survived beyond the 1910s. So the most prominent feature of this specific dress in the 1920s, it ranged from the 1920s all the way into the 30s, is the very feminine style with the full skirt. Sometimes this required extra supports under the skirt to actually have these more pronounced hips and keep the shape. To me, this also draws a little bit of inspiration from the pannier fake hips from the 1700s that was very prominent. Think Marie Antoinette and her gorgeous gowns. A lot of those silhouettes you can kind of see similar influences to this 1920s shape, in my opinion. And so taking this idea of dropped waist, very feminine structures, but then also very interesting shape in the hips is another direction I am leaning towards, because I think it would be very elegant. It would be able to be done in a very modern way, but also draw a lot of inspiration from historical fashion, but not very old, ancient historical fashion. So that is my other inspiration, and I will share more about that specific sketch and inspiration and design. And with all that being said, what in the world is my inspiration for my Met Gala gown? I actually have two. So the first one I had like a vision for while taking a shower one night and thinking about the Met Gala theme, and that is the one that is largely inspired by the 1920s and the robes styles, which I personally think draw a lot of historical inspiration from 1700s panniers. So here's what panniers look like. Here's the 1920s robes styles. How do you reimagine that in a modern way while also still paying homage to historical silhouettes and historical fashion? And personally, when I think of the Met Gala, I tend to think of fashions and styles that are avant-garde. It's not what you're gonna see on a typical red carpet. I don't wanna see people in evening gowns. I wanna see people in a gown that is somehow unique and more extra and extravagant than what you've ever seen before. And so how do you create something that looks different, that you don't think everyone's going to be wearing, while still incorporating that dress code of Garden of Time and paying homage to maybe a garden, maybe time, maybe history? Well, my first inspiration is, again, based on the 1920s. I will either put a picture of this on the screen or do a video of it and overlay it, but essentially this is my inspiration for the more 1920s piece. So we're going to have a dropped waist, which I actually think is becoming a whole lot more popular just in everyday style, but specifically this exaggerated dropped waist that is very reminiscent of the looseness of the 1920s, but also being fitted. So I still wanted to have some structure, which the 1920s doesn't have a lot of. And so that is why I want to put in princess seams so that it's very fitted, structured bodice at the top, but then it drops down to be more of a dropped waist at the bottom. Then I want these really emphasized kind of hips in a way that are very prominent with the robes styles, but also slightly the panniers from the 1700s. So maybe some type of internal structure to keep that up. It would drop like at the calves, I think, to be a really truly 1920s style. And then what do you do about the sleeves? So you could just have like a tank top sleeve, but that's kind of boring. So I was thinking about putting puffs on it, or putting dropped puffs where the puffs like really just hit at the side of your arm, and they're kind of almost like ballerina like little puffs, which, I mean, coquette fashion, here we come. So really love that. Or dropped bow ties. So it's also kind of coquette inspiration. You have a dropped bow tie on the side. Then the back would be like a dropped back, and then I really want this giant type of bow or tie in the back. And this to me draws a little bit from the 1700s. I need to do a little bit more of research of where this tie is truly coming from, but you could do kind of a bustly bow in the back, drawing from the 1800s. So this is my first idea. I'm really envisioning this in like a beautiful red taffeta or satin. So if I go with this, we'll have to see what color I end up going with. I really love the idea of red because I think it is just very Met Gala forward. Green might be pretty, or pink, but this is my first idea. Now, my second idea really, I feel like, melds together the garden and the time historically. So I wanted something that was a little bit more playing into this theme of garden, but also is still going to be true to historical influences and inspiration from a time perspective. And so I came up with this crazy idea for my second idea of a look, which really is more out there. I feel like the first one for the 1920s, it would be very like not a big risk. It would be like what people, I feel like, would typically see you in. The second one is just different. So this is what the second one is, and this is a much more detailed design. And I also drew some of like the lacy effects on the bodice for what I'm thinking about going with. So here's the backstory behind this one. One, I was really inspired by this idea of Elizabethan fashion because I was reading an article and they kind of brought up the historical influences and historical fashion time-wise of Elizabethan fashion, which is very, very noteworthy. There are these very specific structured flat bodices. You have very prominent eye-catching sleeves, and then you also have these collars. So here's some inspiration and ideas of what that Elizabethan fashion is, and I already showed it in the fashion history book as well. So I was trying to pull that together, but like still in a modern way, but then also like gardeny. And the inspiration from this specifically came from an antique tablecloth that I got from a friend. So my friend Maddie, who also lives in Wisconsin, we connected over social media for just a lot of shared interests, specifically crafting and sewing, and she was so lovely to send me a package just full of antique tablecloths that were her nana's, and I just feel so lucky and special to be the recipient of those. And one of those beautiful tablecloths, I'll input the video over this, is this beautiful creamy khaki colored linen cutout hand embroidered tablecloth. I don't remember what this specific style of like handwork and sewing is, but it is essentially cutouts and embroidery, and it's just so beautiful. And I saw this and I was immediately like, oh my goodness, this is the garden inspiration that I needed. It has these beautiful kind of floral lacy patterns, which just like give me like tea party vibes because there's just such a lacy effect. It's also a tablecloth, so it's something you would like see on a table for a tea party in a garden, but then also you have this like historical element because it's like a vintage tablecloth. But then these specific cutouts to me are also very reminiscent of like Edwardian cutout lacy linen fashion. So there's a historical influence there. You also have the linen fabric, which is like drawing into this sustainability and earth, and there's just so much to dissect here. And so I was like, okay, what would I design this into? It's a giant tablecloth. There is tons of fabric and so much I could do. And so I was like, I could just do a really beautiful gown and just keep it more modern, but I want to go like extra and out there. I mean, it's Garden of Time, Sleeping Beauties, Reawakening fashion. We really need to like go big or go home. So this was my inspiration, is a very Elizabethan flat fitted structured bodice corset with this lacy fabric. The skirt itself would also be this laciness as well. I didn't draw the florals there, but it would be this cutout laciness, and I'll put that on the screen what it would look like. And then I was like, I need a statement sleeve. So you could do the short tiny puff, but that's just so boring, and I'm such a big fan of the multi-tiered sleeves. I don't remember what they are called. They're not leg of mutton sleeves, because leg of mutton sleeves are from like the 1860s and only poofy at the top. But these specific 3-tiered sleeves were also very prominent in Elizabethan era Renaissance-y, 1600s-y times. And then I was like, okay, to go even extra, we need like a ruffly collared thing to like tie around my neck. And so that was the inspiration and the idea behind this dress. It would probably be like a midi length. It would also be like fairly gathered and poofy. And then to add in maybe an element of more color, because this specific fabric and tablecloth has these cutouts, you need a fabric to back it. And so I thought, what if you did like a really beautiful, like natural green satiny color, and you put it behind this so that you would have the green peeking through, which is what you see like in the bodice that I'm putting up. And then you could do the sleeves green and then the ruffle neckline green, or the ruffle collar green, and the skirt would have green peeking through. I also thought that the front could have like a green skirt underneath and you have more like side swoops, but I don't think that's the direction I'm going to go with. I think I really am going to do the lace on the skirt with the green in the back. So this one is way more out there than the 1920s inspiration one, but I truly feel like this one really draws in this idea of garden, historical inspiration, time, and blending and melding these many different silhouettes from time and history together. It draws in the repurposedness of using an antique tablecloth. I mean, which is like what I'm all about, is using antique and thrifted things. So anyways, those are my two inspirations for creating my own Met Gala look. I really have no clue which direction I want to go. I would very much love to make both of them, but I do not think that that is very smart or would even be just logically possible for me to do. So these are the two inspirations. Let me know in the comments which one you think I should do. I'll probably post a poll on my social medias and on YouTube as well and let you vote. And I guess whichever one gets the most votes we're gonna go with, and I will definitely be filming that entire process, taking you through making my own Met Gala gown. But that is that. That is my breakdown and the discussion of the 2024 Met Gala theme for the costume exhibit, Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening fashion, looking at noteworthy, delicate, and old historical pieces spanning 400 years, incorporating over 200 pieces into this exhibit, looking at these beautiful gowns, some of them that are never to be worn again because they are so delicate, also coupled with the Met Gala's dress code, which is Garden of Time, incorporating natural garden elements with this idea of fleeting time based on the short story Garden of Time by J.G. Ballard from 1962. So much to unpack there. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. I know it was a bit long, but there was so much to dissect and discuss, and I hope you have maybe a greater appreciation for what the Met Gala is, maybe learn some things that you didn't before. Again, I highly suggest you go watch the documentary First Monday in May. Go read all the amazing articles about the 2024 Met Gala theme and exhibit. I'll link some of those down below that I've referenced in this video, in addition to some of my favorite fashion history references and Met Gala exhibit guides. I will link those as well. But let me know which Met Gala gown you think I should make, which one you would be most excited to see, and also let me know in the comments what is something new that you learned from this video and a key takeaway that you might not have known before. But with all of that being said, I think that wraps up this discussion and this video. Thank you so much for watching and for sticking it out, and I'm really excited to see which direction we end up going for creating a Met Gala gown. So stay tuned for that amazing, exciting project, and get excited for the Met Gala first Monday in May. Thanks for watching. Bye.